So good evening, everyone. My name is Raphaël LANGUILLON, and I am a researcher at the French Institute for Research on Japan at Maison Franco-Japonaise. We are very pleased to welcome you today for an event entitled Local Energy Governance, Opportunities and Challenges for Renewable and Decentralized Energy in France and Japan. This conference is fully in English. It is based on the publication of a new book at Routledge publisher. I have it now in my hands, dedicated to a comparison of local energy governance issues in France and Japan. It's divided in 5 parts and 13 chapters, plus an introduction and a conclusion, written by the two directors of the publication, Magali DREYFUS and SUWA. This book is the result of an international symposium held in Lille, in France, 3 years ago in September 2019, which gathered French and Japanese scholars, specialists of energy issues in both countries. The aim of the book is to examine the extent of the energy transition taking place at a local level in France and in Japan, two countries that share ambitious targets regarding the reduction of GHG emissions. The two speakers, who are also the editors of the book, look on local energy policies and initiatives and apply an institutional and legal analysis to help identifying barriers, but also opportunities in the development of renewable energies in local territories. On a more general level, they try to interrogate local energy and environmental transition issues in France and in Japan. Dealing with those issues, I have the great pleasure to have today 3 scholars. First, of the 2 editors of the book, with Magali DREYFUS, who is a CNRS researcher based at the Center for European Research on Administration, Politics and Society at Lille University in France. Her research focuses on issues of decentralization and management of local public services, as well as on the environmental and energy activities of local authorities, particularly through the subject of climate change. Then I have also the pleasure to welcome SUWA, who is a professor at the Faculty of Contemporary Science of Kyoto Women's University, as well as an instructor at the College of Policy Science at Ritsumeikan University in Kyoto. Her research focuses on how environmental understanding facilitates policy formulation and how this influences the degree of the policy implementation on the ground. Finally, we also have the great pleasure to welcome as a discussant, Brieuc MONFORT, who is an associate professor at the Faculty of Foreign Studies of Sophia University in Tokyo. Previously, he was an economist at the French National Institute for Statistics, and he was also at the Ministry of Finance. He was also a financial advisor in Japan, South Korea, and Australia, as well as a deputy director of the economic section at the Treasury Department of the French Embassy in Japan. So to begin with, Magali DREYFUS, I'm very pleased to welcome you and give you the floor for your half-an-hour presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Raphaël. Good morning or good evening if you're in Japan to all of you. Thank you for being here. So in my part of the presentation, as I am the first speaker, I will introduce you to the book, its origin, the main questions that we rose, and some of our hypotheses. So the very actually early origin of that book comes from a collaboration that I had with SUWA sensei when we were both working at the Institute of Advanced Studies at the United Nations University. At that time, we were based in Yokohama. And we used to work in a program called Sustainable Urban Futures. And basically, we were studying, this very famous catchphrase, think global, act local. And we worked mostly, as far as I'm concerned, on cities from the south, cities in India, in Cambodia. I know SUWA sensei worked also on Japanese cities, but for me, my look at those issues was mostly from the south. And then when I went back to France, I realized actually how much the issue of climate change, local action regarding climate change was actually also very relevant in Western context, in the European context. And it was a hot topic with a clear intention from politicians to deal with the issue of climate change and energy at the local level. So it was obvious that energy had become a policy and political issue at the local scale of government in France, as well actually as in Japan. So how come actually energy becomes such an important issue for local governments, and why the study of local governments, local energy governance is important? Well, first, maybe because energy is a traditional field of responsibility for local government, but also a current issue and a current matter to deal with. We have to remember that historically, the first energy infrastructures, they were developed mostly at the local scale. The first urban services, they were operated thanks to renewable energy exploitation companies which were based at the local level. So local authorities would exploit gas, geothermy, small hydro to have their urban services operated. So those urban services were the public lighting, as you can see on the old pictures in Paris here, but it also has to do with the transports or heating systems. So there is a familiarity which dates back to almost a century of local authorities to the issue of energy. And there are services which have dealt with this issue for a long time, and that explains that there's always been an interest for that question and in local territories. Now, there is also an interest in energy for local authorities due to current actuality, current news. And without even speaking of the current global energy crisis, I just want to remind you that after the Fukushima incident, many communities were actually deprived for weeks of power. And therefore, that's at that time that, for instance, the prefecture of Fukushima launched a program to become a region with 100% renewable energy by 2040. So beyond the idea of developing new techniques, there was a desire to become resilient and autonomous in order to face potential disasters. So therefore, there is spontaneously an interest coming from the bottom on the issue of the energy. Second reasons why energy became an issue for local government is related to the issue of the liberalization of energy markets in the 90s. The goal of the reforms of liberalization reforms in the markets in the 90s was mostly actually to dismantle all the monopolies and to provide a better quality of services, as well as more affordable prices for the consumers. The idea was therefore to push main incumbents to open the different segments of the energy markets. So this should allow slowly local actors who may be public, who may be private, to enter these markets. And these local actors can also be local companies, citizens, local governments. They can have different legal shapes. So in French and Japan, actually, the liberalization of market is quite a revolution. This is quite a radical shift from our traditions. The two countries are, from an administrative point of view, very centralized. And this is actually reflected in the way big infrastructures have developed in our countries. In France, traditionally, there was a significant number of local companies providing energy to local residents at the beginning of the 20th century. They were acting in all the segments of the infrastructures. So in generation, in transport, in distribution, and in final supply. So local companies were acting in all those activities at the beginning of the century. And local governments were recognized that power officially in legislation. But after World War II, a statewide electric utility company was established. This is Électricité de France, EDF, and it was created in order to boost the energy independence and security of supply in France. So it was awarded a monopolistic situation in all segments of the energy change. So all the local companies that used to exist slowly disappeared. Just a few of them could be maintained. And the choice in the 70s to develop nuclear power actually has strengthened, reinforced the monopoly, because nuclear power is, of course, an energy that needs to be dealt with in a very centralized manner. So that choice also of nuclear power has somehow reinforced centralization and the monopoly of EDF on all those different activities. But then in the 90s, European law has had a big impact on the French legislation, and the market was slowly open and deregulated. So this is very recent, and I must say the reforms have not fully been implemented so far. EDF today remains one of the main actors of our energy market, and in particular the electricity market, as you can see on the figure here. But liberalization is in process and should open gates to new players, including local actors. I think, but I'm not the best specialist here, of course, to talk about this, but I think in Japan, we had quite a certain similar development in the energy market. At the very beginning of the 20th century, there were hundreds of electric companies. Slowly, they merged to create 5 major electric companies after the World War I. Then the system was really centralized during the Second World War. And after the Second World War, under the influence of US policies, regional privately owned electric utilities were set up. It is only at the end of the 20th century that here also, at the same time as in France, basically, the market was liberalized, also with the idea that this could lower the prices for the users. So slowly, from wholesales to small users, the market was open to competition. But to date, I think the main incumbents remained the major actors and players in the market. Still, today, at least in theory, market conditions allow local actors to enter the energy market. So this is the second reason why energy is now a local issue. Finally, energy became a central issue at the local level, also because new responsibilities for local authorities were awarded to them in the field of environmental and climate change fields. In fact, parallel to the liberalization process, the development of environmental policies at the international level, and in particular, the raise of the issue of climate change, have changed our national political agendas and has put those issues at the center of the environmental policies of the different states. Already in 1992, with the Earth Summit, which was held in Rio, the role of local authorities in implementing sustainable development was highlighted, in particular in what was called the program of the 21st century, Agenda 21 or 21st Agenda. At that time, local authorities, with all the other local actors at the in the territories at the local level, was highlighted as an important aspect of environmental policies. At that time also, participation in decision-making, in implementing policy, became a central issue for environmental policies and environmental law. And the local level is seen as the best level to ensure participation, to ensure that residents, citizens can participate, can co-construct the environmental policies. Of course, because of proximity between the different actors at the local level. And finally, 1992 is also the date when the United Nations framework on the climate change, to combat climate change, the UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention to combat climate change was adopted. So climate change really became this central issue in our environmental legislation in France, but also in Japan. And since then, cities have actually committed to tackle climate change. They have set themselves targets to reduce their emission, the greenhouse gases emissions. They have adopted plans to mitigate climate change. In France, this is even an obligation for local governments to have a plan to decide how to mitigate climate change. And of course, all this action related to climate change is based mostly on energy actions. And why energy actions? Because there are strong synergies between the two. And especially what local governments try to do is to reduce energy consumption. They can act on energy demand through the public services, but also through information, raising awareness towards residents on how to avoid using too much energy. But this is also through the development of renewable energy. So with this climate change issue and this climate change issue becoming a priority on national agendas, at the local level, there's been also a renewed interest for energy as a way to fight against climate change. And this is done mostly through the development of renewable energy. Recently, this is true for France in particular, in Europe in the years 2020s, a new energy package of legislation was adopted. It is called Clean Energy for All. So it creates a mandatory regulatory framework for France. And actually, interestingly enough, in this package, the role of local authorities, of local citizens is really highlighted as an important strategy of action to fight climate change. It has created new legal categories to promote local governance of energy. So this is binding for the French government. Among those legal categories, we have one called Citizen Energy Community. I won't dwell on it here because we don't have so much time. The other one is called Renewable Energy Community. I have put here the definition of it. Those renewable energy communities are legal entities which are based on an open and voluntary participation. They are autonomous. They are effectively controlled by shareholders or members that are located in the proximity of the renewable energy project that are owned and developed by that legal entity. And the shareholders can be natural persons, they can be small and medium enterprise, they can be local authorities, including municipalities. The primary purpose of those legal entities is to provide environmental, economic, or social community benefits for the shareholders and the members where the legal entity operates. these new legal categories created at the European level actually shows that nowadays local energy governance has become a reality and is taken into account in legislation, so much that, in fact, the European institutions are trying to promote them. What is interesting in this definition is to see that there are non-commercial market actors who are entitled to have a non-discriminatory access to energy infrastructures. The European law assigns those consumers, equal rights to participate in energy market as much as traditional market players. Their activity range from production to consumption, storage, and selling. And what is maybe the most interesting thing is that the primary purpose of those energy community is non-profit. The primary purpose is really to foster social community benefits, environmental benefits. So energy transition here is based, according to European law, on local management, and this local management mustn't have only a profit vision of the energy sector. It must raise a whole series of core benefits, which are social and social economics also. So it is in this triple context, that local actors really became central in the promotion of renewable energy. There is also an important literature, actually. If we now go to literature, if we look at academic papers and chapters, there are many being published now, which deals with this issue of local energy governance. Concepts such as energy communities, energy decentralization, energy citizenship are being studied thoroughly in the literature, in academic literature. They discuss the different forms of interventions, the drivers, the barriers, the motivations that local actors may have in dealing with energy issue. What a lot of those authors show actually is that the traditional centralized energy system might not be suitable for the new global challenges such as climate change and the erosion of resources, of natural resources. So most of those papers are trying to promote a new model of governance, which is multi-level and which is also polycentric, and which includes local actors. Also, you have many policy statements which are being made, which promote local energy government. If we think about the International Energy Agency, in one of its reports, it predicts that more than 71% of new electricity connection in 2030 should be off-grid or based on mini-grid solutions. So here again, we see that those ideas that energy needs to be dealt with at the local level is even reaching the International Energy Agency. The UN General Assembly has also established a global action plan for decentralized renewable energy. It was released in 2019, and it's placing energy decentralization as the center of its strategy to reach the Sustainable Development Goal number 7, which is dedicated to ensuring energy access to all. So here, really, energy decentralization is seen as social, as a strategy to reach a social goal. So as I've just said, like the underlying assumption across those international agencies and in academia is that the involvement by civic and local government actors enable both an accelerated investment in clean technology and new forms of engagement which is traditionally done by passive consumers. So it brings a lot of co-benefits like energy security, but also job creation and local economic and social benefits. So in this context of liberalization of an energy responsibility which is traditional for a local government, with the rise of the climate change issue in policies, and with this interest which is associated to all those phenomena by academia and policy agencies, we thought with Aki that it would be useful, in fact, to understand exactly where the interest of renewable energy for local governance comes from, what they can actually do, and how they take action, what motivates them and how they take action. So there is no fixed, of course, definition of what is energy governance, but we opted for the definition provided by the World Alliance for Decentralized Energy, which says that energy governance are the rules, processes, practices, and behavior that affect the way in which energy is generated and used. So this underlines the strong institutional dimension of governance and the need to look over different domains such as law, politics, economics, environmental science, and so on. As for local, which is our key feature of interest, it may represent a level of government, but also a specific territory, which is marked by specific physical, cultural, social, and economic characteristic, which constitute its proper identity. And therefore, in the context of the book, we study decentralized production, distribution, and consumption of locally available renewable resources and the different actors involved in these processes. It is also important to recall that at the local level, there are many other key actors, not only local governments, not only local citizens. You have private commercial entities, you have big energy market players and the many incumbents who are there. You have the central government administration, and all those, their interactions actually define what is the local energy governance. So we also, in the book, actually chose to give a specific look at social sciences. This is clearly an intention that we had, because many authors have underlined and highlighted that energy transition cannot only be thought as a technically driven process. You also have to consider that this is a social process that involves a redistribution of powers and responsibilities across a wide spectrum of stakeholders. So it is key to understand this to ensure the efficacy and effectiveness of all the different low carbon activities. So all this was, in fact, discussed in a 3-day conference in Lille. The event was sponsored by the CNRS, GSPS, CERAPS, Lille University, and Kyoto Women University. And on this 3-day event, a Japanese team of 6 researchers came to discuss with their French counterparts, included Raphaël Languillon, which I thank again, the issue of local governance of energy. We also heard researchers from third countries, from Korea, Mexico to Belgium, Austria, and Germany, because their local governance initiatives are really mushrooming all over the world. So it was also nice to have this third look at third party look at what is actually local energy governance. And the contributions in the book are all pluridisciplinary. We have economists, legal scholars, environmental science scholars, and sociologists writing a chapter. Also, I want to raise the point that although we were very open on the definition of energy, actually most of the contribution focus on electricity. Quite naturally, actually, the actors the authors focused on this issue. So the book is organized in 5 parts. So you see the first part examines the national framework of energy governance. The second part focuses on the local government's powers. The third part on the different form of local partnerships for the development of renewable energies, which includes citizens, communities, companies. The fourth part focuses on the initiatives called 100% renewable energies, where territories are trying to promote a 100% renewable energy locally. And the fifth part focuses on technological issues and digitalization of the energy services. And the main conclusion are that actually, so this is very hard to make general statements. In science, you cannot draw general statements like this from very different experiences and case studies, but still there are trends or very big remarks that we can do. So for instance, in both countries, we see that indeed local renewable energy initiatives are mushrooming, and that can be spontaneously a desire from the bottom, from a local community, but that can also be the fact of an obligation from the legislator, at least in France, sorry. What is very clear, at least in Japan from the book, but again, we have only some case studies, so it should be we should do more case studies to be sure to be very assertive, but economic perspectives and economic benefits are still are a big share of what motivate actors in entering that kind of activity. The environmental aspect is not always the priority for the people at the local level who actually enter the activity of producing renewable energy. So economy still here, not only environmental or the fight against climate change as a goal. And when it comes to benefits though, we realize that actually once the activities is settled, the communities often praise the different benefits, such as sometimes a feeling of pride. And the idea is that your community can really be identified by a project on renewable energies. This is something that gives values to the community. This was very clear, for instance, in Germany and in Austria, where actually even tourism is developing around those activities of renewable energy. And therefore, the community really feels some pride out, really draws some pride out of the activity. Then a key factor is the legal form of partnerships that exists. How can corporations be built and what kind of governance those companies have? So this really determines the local actors in taking actions. They need to feel that they can fit their activity in the legal entities that will protect them from the risks and that will allow them to have multiple partners, private, which have expertise on the energy in the energy sectors, citizens who will allow acceptation at the local level, acceptability, and local authorities which who can show a real political engagement. And even though both governments show an interest in local energy governance, it is very clear in France and Japan that the central authorities remain the main actors, of course, because they produce legislation, but also because anyway, the infrastructures are still very centralized. And even though there's been a liberalization, the sector of energy remains very centralized. And I will end up here, sorry. I hope I haven't spent all my time. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Magali. And actually, you are perfectly on time, so don't worry for that. It was very well managed. And so, thank you for introducing the different background of the initiative and the framework of the book. And now, without any transition, I give the floor to Professor SUWA.
I'm very happy to share our result of the research and the book contents to the audience. And yeah, thank you very much for Magali to nicely place the background of our book project. Yes. Yeah, as Magali explained a lot about the commonality between the Japanese and the French energy scene, so maybe you, the audience, may already have an idea how similar Japan and France is in terms of the energy policy, because both of the countries have some centralized structure and controlling which energy should be promoted and which is not. And so and as a matter of fact, as a researcher in Japan, I would like to give some illustrated picture on the Japanese scene as an example of the centralized market system and how that has been changed throughout the liberalization process, and how the local governance is emerged in the Japanese scene. Because the Japanese emergence of local governance is echoed with the French scene. As Magali said, the European directive is changing the whole context of the international local governance on the energy development. Therefore, Japanese as an example of that changing situation. So my slide is touching upon the overall picture of the Japanese policy and also local energy governance, why that is important, and how that matters to the local areas as a supply side. Then go for the demand side, the supply side. And then the next, I will go for the electricity supply side, how that contributes to the locality. Again, there's a similarity between the France and Japan. Both of the country has some share of nuclear dependency, and energy decentralization is on the way. Also, the community renewables are progressing to some extent. But we have different degree of coherence in terms of policy and implementation. And in France, the role of regulators and mandatory planning, perhaps, for example, the building control, the local government has a stronger power than the Japanese counterparts. Therefore, maybe in terms of the French side, there are some areas where the French local government can easily implement local energy governance. And on Japan, on one side, there's some progressive roles and debate over the local graphite producers and suppliers. So I would like to cover on that. Yeah. So people are aware of the changing global context where the renewables are focused, and then that is much needed after, especially the Ukrainian war started. So the people in Japan are often exposed to the information where the European countries are going for the renewables. So we would like to touch upon that issue later, perhaps on the discussion time, but how Japan is catching up the renewable and local governance at the ground level. Because local governance and local energy utilization is very important for making the three goals in one time. For example, economy, secure job opportunity, creating job, and securing the environment and securing the social benefits. So energy could be the center of those three targets. So therefore, the local governance initiatives is very key to create this three, not win-win, but win-win-wins. But how the Japanese energy scene is catching up this argument? Well, that is questionable because in our country, as many people are aware, we have so much dependency on the fossil fuel. That's perhaps a little bit of difference between France, because French energy scene has I think higher dependency on the nuclear, although the Japanese government also wants to revitalize the Japanese nuclear after 3.11. But anyway, at the moment, Japan is heavily relying on fossil fuel. The argument perhaps is related to the self-sufficiency of the energy sources. The Japan has the marginal portion of the fossil fuel reserves. Therefore, we traditionally have to depend on the fossil fuel. But gradually, the renewables are catching up. Therefore, although on the very small scale, Japanese self-sufficiency rate is gradually improving from 6% in 5 years ago to 9% at this moment. But we have to have some argument on the fossil fuel use, because the fossil fuel is related to the national gross expenditure in terms of import and export. In order to stop the financial exodus to the foreign countries of producing oil and then natural gas reserves, we are spending so much money, financial resources for purchasing those fossil fuel that adds to the year by year. Therefore, that is adding to the 1/3 of importing expenditure of the national gross expenditure. I'd like to add one context of the comparison between France and Japan, because France is also importing some portion of electricity from outside of its domain, for example, from Germany. Therefore, it could be very interesting comparison to see to what extent the France is spending money for the outside of the country to purchase electricity sources, and then how much that could, that makes the comparison with the Japanese scene. Because national wealth is strongly related to national expenditure. Therefore, fossil fuel financial excess could mean that the national wealth outflow. Therefore, each country which is importing fossil fuel is, losing their financial resource that could be spent to domestic services otherwise. Looking at the local level, that is clear, because in terms of national level, yes, we are losing money. Also, local level, for example, at the north area where heat demand is high, they have to spend so much on the fossil fuel to heat their homes and houses. Therefore, the deficit at the local level is clear. And in local, if you go to the local area, regional area, then if the government or local government is not pushing the renewables to some extent, the local expenditure on the fossil fuel counts a lot, and then that could add to the poverty level of each area. Therefore, renewables could be a key to the local wealth. Then that can add the saturation economic argument by creating sufficient energy at the domain and used and produced and then create the wealth at the local businesses and people. That is a logic behind, because we are looking at local energy development and also the thinking of the wealth of the people. But how much do the Japanese government, does the Japanese government really looking at that issue? is somehow progressing, but still questionable, because this is accountability from the Japanese government, how they are planning to do in the future in terms of energy policy. Yes, they are aware of the CO2 emission from energy sources coming from most of the energy services, but there are a real, I don't know how to say, they are real using the excuse to focusing on, okay, we do not have fossil fuel reserves, therefore we have to continue importing the fossil fuel. Well, that is seen behind between the lines of the government account of those energy policies. And although that is again the same in the renewable development. Renewable energy is developing slowly but steadily, but the Japanese government always showing this illustration. Okay, Japanese self-sufficiency rate was 12.1% lower than the other OECD countries. What does it mean? Means that we have self-sufficiency ratio is low, therefore we have to have some technical fix, like for example, between the line, nuclear, or continue to have the coal development. Well, it's not written here, but between the line, yes, I smell it. Well, the result is this: many other European countries are pushing heavily on the renewable development, but Japan somehow lagging behind in terms of the growing race. I understand why, because the growing ratio is a little slow, because again, this is Japanese government accountability, and we have the left-hand side, we are showing that renewable development is is growing, but on the other hand, okay, they show this, picture of how much renewable is costing. Yes, feed-in tariff to support renewable. Yes, that is costly. That's why, well, renewable is growing, but costly. The information is coming always as a set. Also, this is the Japanese government accountability, the explanation on how damaging the renewable could be to the local environment. That can be destroyed by typhoon, or that can cause the landslide of the mountain area when it has a heavy rain, and it could be submerged into the water. So it was talking in the same line with the Japanese the heavy disasters like a Fukushima 3.11 disaster. Well, I understand that renewables also could cause the environmental damage, but the scale of the nuclear accident and the renewable accident, are they the same? Well, I think there's some sort of value twist here. Okay. But anyway, I understand. So there should be some ways to minimize the environmental impact of renewable. That is true, right? But again, coming back to the national government's policy, is showing here as a little bit of technical fix oriented, because they are looking at hydrogen and methanation technology as a priority for the next 10 to 20 years. Methanation, sorry, I a little bit distort from the main line of the story, but methanation has some future. Yes, I understand. But okay, at the same time, we should have looking at the local or the frontline energy issue, including energy efficiency and energy development at the people's domain, as well as the technical fix at elitist level. Well, how that be seen by the outside of experts in terms of Japanese energy policy is like this. One example is climate action track is looking at the Japanese government and seeing the Japanese energy policy as insufficient in terms of the CO2 policy. Also, the IEA has a similar view as to the Japanese government, looking at the only voluntary action to be encouraged by the Japanese government, and not having the overall policy to spur energy transition. Well, that's why local government is somehow hanged between the government indecisiveness and then the voluntary action from the localities. So there's some suspended policy between the government and the bottom line in terms of local government. But there are some new wave of local government is catching up because there's some changing context of one is electricity reform, which is explained by Magali, which is happening in France and also happening in Japan. That could open up the players to coming in. That is echoed by the people's reaction to catching up to change the electricity company, because there are many more and more renewable electricity company which people can choose. Also, another changing context is the Philippine tariff, although that is being identified and expensive as the government, and it's been changing from FIT to FIP, the different system in recent years, but that has certainly changed in the Japanese energy scene to develop more renewable at local level. Therefore, local government is trying to establish the mechanisms to create the financial flow to supply more to the local energy company at their premises, also providing service to the residents at their area. So again, Magali explained a very nice a very interesting development at the European level of community energy entity. Well, that is happening in Japan. The community energy development and entities are trying to supply energy produced at local level and then sell it to the people in their vicinity, and then create a profit and then circulate that back to the people at their area. So there are many kinds of energy community entities, and then as an illustration, I'd like to touch on for the municipal utility, how that could circulate back some financial benefits to the people. Because there are many municipal utilities established in Japan, and that is adding local value to their area. For example, well, one of the example is Yamagata Municipal Utility is creating a profit each year. And then if we look at carefully how much they distribute the benefits to the local area, it's significant, because the top side yellow line is if this municipal utility is not supplying the electricity from their Yamagata prefecture area, then the money which could be money for the supplier is spent for outside of Yamagata prefecture. But because this company is supplying the electricity from their domain, all the profit, their procurement supply is circulating back to the local business which created the renewable in their domain. Therefore, locally value added profit is really contributing to their business vicinity, and they pay the corporate tax to the prefecture level, and then they hire the local people as an employer. And so that's financially validated that the local energy governance create the financial benefit to the area. So because of the short of time, I touch upon a little bit more on the supplier side. One example is the supplier in terms of the geothermal or energy. Well, there are many, there are a lot of potential, not just the geothermal, but there are much potential in Japan in terms of renewable development. And so there are more and more local renewable suppliers, well, again, supplying their electricity to the municipal suppliers, also to the electricity market at the national level. But there are more and more. And also, because we have to be careful whether they're, although locally produced, their renewables could not be damaging or, overdeveloped at their local area, because the resource may be depleted if we develop too much on their resources, especially the geothermal. Well, that is also same in the photovoltaic or the wind. Again, we have to be very careful who to develop and who shall not be in the local domain. So there are many mechanisms to see which one could come into the market, which one is out, to set up, for example, local council to carefully observe and then regulate the local players. So, well, that is happening both the supplier side, championed by municipal suppliers for circulating money back, or in terms of electricity supplier developing their locally available renewables. Okay, so that is why, well, that could add some nice mechanisms for local governance to let the participation coming in from the residents and other players to have a very nice the structure. Well, but again, there's a problem in our country because, okay, national government is using the Ukrainian war and the energy shortage as a kind of threat to the consumers to say that, well, renewables are not stable, and therefore we have to look at some stable like energies like nuclear power. Well, I do not discriminate nuclear as a short-term option, but that although the problem is that the short-term option could distort the price signal to the market, which could, now seeing the renewable as a cheap option, but maybe the people in general may think that nuclear may also be, the cheap option in a coming few decades. Therefore, we have to be very careful to see how the government policy of overseeing and regulating the market prices and the national energy policy directions. Otherwise, for example, yes, that is a very sad story could happen. I visited one of the schools in Hokkaido, which is for geothermal engineering. This school is to educate the engineer for drilling the hole for geothermal development. Then the dean is very hopeful to have the nice 30 enrollment of the student, but and then also the facility is very nice and there are many beds and to stay, let the students stay. But as a sad story, this school has only 3 enrollment this year. So the point is, local governance is coming, but national level, well, do we have sufficient, support for the local actions, which is coming only voluntarily, and so rely on very marginal schemes like feed-in tariff, and then as a threat of feed-in premium, the insecure option for their business insurance. And also the we have some technologies, but looking at the engineering side, we are short of engineer, and we have to have more support for the development on ground. So my argument is, local governance is happening here in Japan, and also internationally. That is being focused by institutions like IEA and the European Unions, and they have some growing opportunity, both France and Japan. That is being witnessed. So my argument is there any sufficient support from the national government for flourishing those local initiatives? Because that could be validated by financially, that could add the local benefit. But the national government using the national wealth argument to say that nuclear is to contribute, stop the financial outflow to the fossil fuel. Well, that, so therefore we have to have some solid policy support to let the local governance, the core of the national policy, into decentralized future. Okay, I would like to to stop this argument, but yes, argument discussion. I would like to have some discussion perhaps later on how can we develop local actors, how the changing local global energy context could affect the two countries' energy policy with the audience. It would be my pleasure. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, SUWA Sensei. You also respect the time perfectly, so it was very clear. So now, without any transition, I give the floor to Brieuc MONFORT for the role of the discutant.
Okay, so first of all, I'm very grateful, for this opportunity to have to comment the book, and also for the opportunity to read it. I very much enjoy reading it. So probably before I go into a bit more deeply into the subject, just a quick disclaimer. So I'm not an energy sector economist. It's more my background is more on the macro side. But then reading this book, I try to see what sort of the connection I had with the energy sector. Throughout my career, and actually, one first connection was, if I may, was I was working on AT, for the International Monetary Fund, and the long-term goal was, of course, to ensure energy supply for economic growth. But then there was also there was 2006 at the time of the Soccer World Cup, and there was an immediate goal, which was to ensure that there was no power cut during transmission of soccer matches. So, and then I work also for example on Paraguay. So it was more macro issue. And I was in Japan at the time of the Fukushima nuclear accident, and of course the big question was what would be the impact on the Japanese economy. And since then I have some interest for some topics that were not in the textbook when I was studying economics. Okay, so moving on to the book itself. So I was very clear from the presentation, there's an needed transition in terms of like the energy sector, I mean, both in France and Japan. So I try to, IFRJ-MFJ insisted on like the commonality between like both countries, but if I just look at, for example, like the targets and what is the starting point. So both countries, for example, have like some comparable goals by 2030 in terms of like the energy provided by renewable energies. So they, I mean, slightly like different indicators. So, but they also have like somewhat like a similar starting point in terms of like maybe like 25%, you know, like the actual electricity produced by renewable energies at this point, and the goal is to go to something like I mean 35 or I mean 40%, right? And of course, like I was I mean mentioned many times, like those this transition is crucial actually to reach the target in terms of climate change. Okay, and then like also like, I mean, one difficulty is that like I mean, that was very clear from like what Magali DREYFUS said about like the historical background. So there's a shift from a centralized model of energy production to a decentralized model, which is like very much local. And, you know, how to promote this transition, what are the institutional and regulatory reform needed. And also like on the political economy, I mean, side, one element I found like, which was like common in both countries, is that to some extent, like at the time of the symposiums that led to the book, there was an opportunity actually like to push, I mean, for institutional reform and also like to push for like renewable energies, because on one side, for example, in France, like I mean, nuclear power plants are aging, and there's a question like whether they should be rebuilt or whether we, you know, there should be like a greater push for renewable energy on one side. And in Japan, of course, like the opportunity was related with the Fukushima nuclear accident, with nuclear energy shifting from like 25% of electricity production to only like 5%. But the issue there is that, for example, like the existing centralized actors may prevent, I mean, new actors to emerge. And that was a little bit like clear from the, I mean, that was like alluded in the what SUWA was discussing at the end, with the gap between like a local level and national authorities that, you know, may not fully embark on this transition. Okay, so I mean, quickly, so like what I liked about the book was like interdisciplinary approach. So it was like both like I mean, legal, political, sociological, technical perspective. And also it's like, I mean, from an intellectual point of view, like, so we're moving from like a centralized system, which is to some extent like, I mean, easy to understand. It's like just one monopoly. In Japan, it's a bit more complex, but like regional monopoly producing electricity, to local actors. And what I find like the book was, I mean, very nice at doing is to allow us to navigate through this transition by understanding, you know, what are those new actors. So, you know, it's the idea about like it's, I mean, local initiative is really something like is mushrooming. It's confusing, and that's why like the book is I mean, is excellent to try to through case studies or through the discussion to explain. I mean, those. I mean, those. Who are those new actors? Okay, now of course, like there's also like the impact of like a comparative study with France and Japan, but also a few other countries. And also like there was like I mean, clear also like from the first presentation this evening, like the historical perspective, the fact that we are to some extent like the transition is a revolution in this, I mean, in the etymological sense of the word, as it like we are moving back to you know, local energy production. That was the case like early 20th century, and then like we have the centralized system, and now like we move it back to local actors. So I just have like 3 questions, and I do apologize a bit in advance because my, I mean, compared to the scope of the book, my question might be slightly narrow and a bit orthogonal like to the issue of governance, but it deals with also the fact that, you know, you have like this technological, economic perspective. So I have like some specific question on what maybe I'd like you to clarify. Okay, so Yeah, so just that it is, you know, it's just like reinforcing like what we said earlier about like in terms of like the transition, like so we have like this, you know, I mean, 2 countries. Yeah, it's some of the countries that are discussed in the book, and there was also like, I mean, clearly in one presentation is that like maybe France and Japan, I mean, are lagging behind, right? So the second slide of SUWA was the world is changing with behind. I mean, in terms of like electricity generation by modern renewable, it seems that I mean Japan is lagging behind. Okay, so I'm moving on to my question. So there's one full section of the book discussing the goal of like 100% renewable energy. So it's like, I mean, clearly it's like a renewable energy for territories. It's not like fully discussed at the national level, but at the same time, like in the earlier chapter, for example, there was some discussion about like, I mean, civil society push for 100% renewable energy. And my understanding of the issues there is that like, I mean, from a technical side, like renewable energy, I mean, discussed in the book, like wind, solar, so they're like intermittent energy. So you have then like, for example, like, you know, when it's windy, but it's not when windy, you have no energy. I mean, same for example, like solar energy, it's in daytime, but then like peak consumption might be like early morning or late, for example, like late evening when people are coming back home. So you have this issue about like, you know, the difference between like supply and demand, and the difficulty of like shifting maybe, I mean, fully to 100% renewable energy, because we need to have like those, I mean, other sources of energy. And there was like one chapter that was discussing that specifically, I mean, not for a local territory, but for a full region in, in Kyushu or, I mean, Western Japan, and there was the issue of like reaching this goal. So my second question is about, I mean, to the political economy. So I understand that this institutional change is a reality, but at the same time, it's not like maybe, I mean, in Japan and in France, like fully giving its, I mean, doesn't have this full potential compared to, you know, to what might be expected. And maybe like one reason is that like it's political, and because it's political, it's like it's difficult. And I have the sense that so in the book you make the case that I mean, some of those local government moving to implementing those reforms and promoting like local energy, I mean, they're not doing it fully for the sake of the climate or because I mean, green is good. They're also doing it also like for the, for example, like employment effect, the impact on the local economy. But my point is that like, is there, I mean, another case, for example, for the renewable energy is that like, you know, it used to be like more expensive, much more expensive, for example, from electricity produced by all utilities. But at least, for example, on the, I mean, solar photovoltaic, I mean, the cost of this energy I mean, the cost of producing like with this type of energy has decreased a lot. So the case is, it's not just like we need to do it because it's green or, I mean, it's going to be sustainable or whatever, but it's like from, you know, from the investor point of view, it makes sense financially to do it. I mean, especially if you, for example, like introduce, let's say like carbon pricing and of course, like the old fossil, I mean, for all fossil fuel, especially like, I mean, coal, as they're going to be, I mean, from this point of view, like increasingly expensive, and like we have like, I mean, clean energy, and with the economies of scale, they're getting like expensive. So could this be, I mean, one reason to drive the increase of renewable energy? And my last point, so it was discussed in the second presentation by SUWA also. But so the book is based on a symposium organized like 3 years ago, and a lot has changed since then. And it actually, so you know, one part, of course, like we're doing this conference over, I mean, over Zoom. So this is the impact of COVID, but COVID might not be, I mean, the most important impact, because there was like wishful thinking that, well, you know, we're going to spend like less on energy, to move to more sobriety, whatever. it didn't happen. But then, of course, like the big change discussed at the end was about the war in Ukraine. So we were expecting, for example, like what I put here is that like some forecast of the price of commodity fuel from the IMF, and we were expecting like some. So it's just some index, but what we have now is like for the next 5 years, the price is going to be twice as much as what it was supposed to be, and also like historically, it's much higher actually, also that historical price. And so, how do you see the impact on this necessary transition for renewable energy? Because on one side, it could be like positive. We need to be like we need to have like more sufficiency. Energy sufficiency, it's other type of energy are more expensive, so maybe we need to shift to more renewables. But then like there's the option that well, maybe in some countries, and France and Japan, like nuclear is going to be might be the cheapest option. So that's my three questions. And again, like I really much enjoy reading and discussing the book, and thank you.